The movie begins deep in the Amazon rainforest, where a man's boat breaks down. He tries to call for help over the radio and notices the boat rocking, as if something heavy has climbed aboard. Terrified, he grabs his weapon and starts fighting an unknown intruder. However, the creature manages to break through the floor and come up from below. The man tries to escape and opens the door, then climbs up the mast, but realizes his fate won't change. In desperation, he decides to end his suffering and shoots himself. Sometime later, at a hotel located in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, a director named Terry is conducting research on an indigenous tribe that is the subject of her documentary. She meets Stephen, who tells her he has been speaking with explorers searching for the location of the Sharam tribe. The film's protagonist learns that the village is near a source along the Rio Negro, the Black River, and the team gathers by the riverbank to make their final preparations before the journey. Before departure, Stephen speaks with Mateo, who shows him the fastest route. However, the captain insists that traveling through one of the tributaries would be safer, even if it adds about 35 miles to the trip. Despite finding it odd, Stephen agrees to Mateo's suggestion, and the team boards the boat to begin their journey along the Black River. Suddenly, a massive storm hits. In the middle of it, they come across a stranded boat with a man shouting for help. Terry asks Mateo to get closer, and Gary helps pull the man aboard. Everyone gathers around the man, who introduces himself and explains that his boat broke down after roots got tangled in the propeller. Stephen says they can't take him back to Manaus since they're heading upriver, but Paul responds that they can drop him off at the next village because he knows the local tribes well. Paul then takes the opportunity to fish with a spear, which makes Stephen curious about him. Paul explains that he's from Paraguay and came to the Amazon to hunt snakes for zoos. After introductions, the snake hunter asks what kind of animal they're looking for. Stephen replies that they're making a documentary about the Sharam tribe, also known as the People of the Mist. Paul says he's never heard that name before, but claims he knows where they are and can take them there. However, the producer Warren doesn't trust him and suspects he's trying to lead them into a trap. Despite that, the team decides to trust Paul and continues their journey. That night, Stephen and Terry spend some time by the fire, unaware that a massive anaconda is nearby on the shore, coiling around its prey. The next day, the team continues until they reach a huge statue of a snake wrapped around a man. As soon as Paul sees it, he tells them it was built by the Sharam tribe, who worship snakes. Paul goes on to explain that the tribe worships the anaconda as a god that protects them, and that they have a legend about the universe taking the form of a snake. Stephen interrupts, saying he knows the legend but that it doesn't belong to the Sharam tribe. Still, Paul continues confidently, claiming the tribe should be to the right at the fork. Stephen responds that the water level is higher than usual, and that the tribe has likely moved to higher ground. He then orders Mateo to head north, in the opposite direction Paul is pointing, suspecting that the stranger is trying to lead them somewhere specific. After a long day of travel, the team docks the boat to rest. The sound crew decides to head into the jungle to record some audio. Gary and Denise start searching for unusual sounds but suddenly notice that everything has gone silent. Moments later, something begins approaching them, and they run back toward the boat. Paul saves them by shooting at whatever was chasing them from inside his room. Hearing the gunshot, Stephen grabs his pistol to check things out, but when he realizes it was just a wild boar scaring them, he feels a huge sense of relief. After that terrifying ordeal, the team continues their journey as usual until the anchor rope gets tangled in the propeller. Mateo decides to put on a diving suit and go underwater to cut the rope. After a while, something happens beneath the surface, and he starts struggling desperately, trying to get back up. The team thinks he's drowning, so Danny jumps into the water to save him and brings him back to the boat within seconds. After removing the oxygen mask, they notice something inside Stephen's mouth and discover a venomous wasp lodged in his throat. Terry panics and checks his lungs, realizing he isn't breathing, but Paul says it's normal and performs a life-saving procedure. He makes an incision in Stephen's neck and inserts a tube to help him breathe. Stephen remains unconscious, and they're forced to continue without a guide. On top of that, the radio is broken, so they can't call for help. Terry orders Mateo to head back the way they came, but Paul tells them that would take 2 extra days since they'd be going against the current. However, if they take the route he originally suggested, they could cut at least 45 miles off the trip. Despite her doubts, Terry realizes time is running out and agrees to follow the snake hunter's advice, against Danny's wishes. The team eventually reaches a dam blocking their path. Paul suddenly pulls out dynamite from his bag and suggests blowing it up so they can continue. Even though she knows it will harm the environment, Terry understands Steven's life is at risk and that they have no choice but to move forward. Gary helps Paul attach the dynamite to the wooden structure, and the explosion is so powerful that debris falls onto the boat, hitting fuel canisters and knocking them into the water. Suddenly, snakes start raining down everywhere. One of them lands on Warren's hand, wraps around his finger, and tries to bite him despite its small size. After dealing with the snakes, Denise notices the fuel canisters have fallen into the water and says they won't be able to continue. But Paul reassures them that they can travel up to 60 miles with the fuel still in the tanks, which should be enough. The team keeps going until they come across an abandoned boat. Paul asks Mateo to help him check it out and see if there's any fuel. Paul realizes it's the same boat belonging to the man who killed himself earlier. Afraid the others might figure out who he really is, he removes a photo of the team from the wall and continues searching until he finds a bag containing reptile sedatives and some equipment. He takes the items and returns to the boat. As he's getting back, Mateo slips and falls right in front of a hungry anaconda. The snake lunges at him, wraps around his body, and bites his neck. After tightening its grip, it swallows him whole. Meanwhile, the rest of the team waits on the boat, completely unaware of what just happened. When Mateo doesn't return, Danny decides to go look for him. Terry tries to use her authority as the director to get Paul to go with him, but he refuses, insisting that Mateo is already dead. Danny searches near the abandoned boat but only finds a flashlight. When he returns, he finds Paul showing them a piece of anaconda skin over 15 meters long, claiming that Mateo was eaten by it, which terrifies everyone even more. Paul then suggests helping them capture the snake for money, but Terry refuses to move until they find Mateo. She turns on the boat's lights to search for him, but after a full day of searching, they find nothing. Denise grows increasingly frightened and insists that Paul is responsible for Mateo's disappearance. Gary tells her to go get some rest while they talk. After she leaves, Paul tells Gary the anaconda is nearby and that he can't catch it alone, asking for his help. The snake hunter kills a small monkey to use as bait, but the rest of the team strongly opposes the idea and tries to throw it overboard. Gary defends Paul, saying that without Steven, they won't be able to reach any village, and that their only option is to document the moment the snake is captured. Danny, fed up with his friend's behavior, tries to throw both Paul and Gary off the boat, but Paul fires a shot next to him to scare him and makes it clear that he's in charge from now on. He throws the bait into the water and waits all night until something finally bites. Paul is certain it's the anaconda. He tells everyone to stay quiet and starts reeling it in, revealing a massive snake. He orders Gary to turn on the lights and begins striking the anaconda until it loses consciousness. Taking advantage of Paul being distracted, Danny sneaks up behind him with a small knife, trying to kill him, but the anaconda's tail slams him to the ground, and the knife falls into the water. The anaconda continues struggling, throws Paul to the ground, breaks the chain that was meant to restrain it, and disappears into the darkness. After that, the anaconda suddenly bursts out of the water and throws the bait back onto the boat, exactly the opportunity Paul was waiting for to hit it with a tranquilizer. As he does, Terry runs toward the kitchen, but the anaconda chases after her. At the last second, Paul manages to shoot the sedative straight into its mouth. The snake starts thrashing violently, slamming into a table and knocking Denise into the water. Gary jumps in to save her, but the anaconda spots both of them and lunges. It grabs Gary as he's climbing out and begins crushing him. Denise tries to help, while Terry grabs a rifle and aims at the massive snake's head, but Paul stops her, insisting the anaconda is worthless if it's dead. In the end, the anaconda swallows Gary whole, leaving everyone on the boat convinced that Paul has completely lost his mind. As the anaconda swims along the riverbed with Gary inside its stomach, Terry puts on makeup and heads to the control deck where Paul is. She tells him the documentary could have been her greatest work, but everything is ruined now, unless he lets her film him capturing the anaconda. She moves closer, pretending she needs protection, and hugs him to distract him while Danny sneaks up from behind. But the plan fails when Paul spots Danny in the mirror and exposes the trap. Furious, Paul turns his weapon on them, but suddenly Warren appears behind him and knocks him unconscious. Danny suggests throwing his body into the river, but Terry refuses and decides to tie him up instead. The next day, Terry searches through Paul's belongings and finds a paper with a photo of him alongside Mateo and the snake. She realizes everything was planned from the beginning, even the wasp that ended up in Steven's mask. Terry slaps Paul, then heads back to the deck where Danny and Warren are steering the boat. After a while, they reach a waterfall and get stuck between rocks, unable to move forward. Danny suggests going into the water to tie ropes to nearby trees so they can pull the boat through. As they move toward a tree, Denise approaches Paul to avenge Gary, but when she looks into his eyes, she hesitates and drops the knife. Sensing her weakness, Paul attacks, wrapping his legs around her neck and strangling her to death. While Danny is tying the rope, Paul throws Denise's body into the water and grabs her knife to cut the lines. Suddenly, Danny notices movement in the water and shouts that the anaconda is coming. Warren decides to distract the snake and lead it away while the rest of the team swims back to the boat. Warren can't escape in time, so he climbs up the rocks near the waterfall to get away, but the combined weight causes a tree to collapse onto the boat, forcing everyone to jump off to avoid being crushed. Once things calm down, Terry swims back to the boat and finds Danny trapped underwater beneath debris. He manages to free himself and swim up, but then Denise's body suddenly floats up in front of him, terrifying him. The anaconda senses his movement, leaves Warren behind, and goes after him, wrapping around him and starting to crush him. Terry rushes to save him, crawling toward the rifle and firing at the anaconda just before it can swallow Danny. He manages to escape, but Paul is still alive and now wants revenge after losing his prey. Danny is about to be killed, but Steven wakes up from the commotion, grabs a tranquilizer, and shoots Paul in the back. Danny finishes it by elbowing Paul, sending him into the water. After things settle down, they return Steven to his bed and continue their journey in search of help, eventually reaching an abandoned dock. They go ashore looking for fuel, and after searching for a while, they find barrels next to a massive shed snake skin. While they're examining the area, Paul suddenly reappears behind them and knocks them unconscious. He decides to use them as bait to lure the anaconda, covering them in monkey blood and waiting for it to arrive. The anaconda shows up and coils around them, but just before it can eat them, Paul activates a trap that ensnares them in a net. As he prepares to tranquilize the snake, it breaks free from the trap and charges at him, biting his shoulder. He tries to escape, stumbling up a ladder, but the anaconda catches him, crushing his bones one by one before opening its jaws to swallow him alive. Terry screams for Danny to grab the fuel and run, but the anaconda is still hungry and comes after them. Terry tries to hide and ends up in a room that turns out to be the snake's nest. The creature smashes through the wall behind her, and Paul's body is spat out of its mouth. Terry runs back to Danny, and they come up with a plan. She'll distract the anaconda while he sets it on fire. She runs toward a chimney, the snake chasing close behind and knocking over fuel barrels. Danny attaches a device to the anaconda's tail and tells Terry to climb up. Once she reaches the top, he lights the fuse and tells her to get out fast, but the hatch is stuck, and she gets trapped for a moment before finally forcing it open. The chimney explodes, sending the anaconda crashing into the water along with her. Despite everything, the anaconda is still alive and starts swimming toward her, but stops just before reaching her. Danny tells Terry to take the fuel and go, but as he turns around, the snake appears again. With no other choice, he kills it using an axe, striking a fatal blow to its head. In the end, the massive anaconda is finally dead, and the team survives. Before leaving, they decide to stop by the Sharam tribe to finish filming their documentary. And that's how the movie ends. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, your opinion matters. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel.